me because I'm putting it in my own words. And what we're going to be studying today is basically the availability of a network. What are we going to do? How are we going to make a network available? How are we going to keep it up? And we're going to be reviewing some notes here, and I'm going to get this out of the way. That way you guys can hear me better. So what we basically do to keep a network available up and running in a business, because that's probably where you're going to be working mostly, some sort of business. So what is network availability? Network availability is the measure of how well a computer network can respond to connectivity and performance demands that are placed on it. So how well can it respond? It's like, so basically the performance of it, the demands on it, whenever, how available it is, whenever someone needs to use it, pretty much. So now let's talk about the topic high availability. So availability is measured in uptime, meaning how up is the network, how often is it up. 5 nines, it says 5 nines of availability. Basically 5 nines of availability is that's how often it needs to be up. So 99.999% basically is high availability. The maximum of 5 minutes of downtime per year would be considered high availability. So you don't want your network to be down more than 5 minutes a year, if at all possible. I highly doubt that's possible. That sounds very theoretical, because I'm pretty sure your network's going to be down probably longer than 5 times a year. But hey, if you can do that, good for you. Good for you. All right, now let's talk about availability, concerned with billing up and operational. So availability basically means it's up. It's going to be up and operational as much as possible. Reliability, concerned with not dropping. Basically, reliability is how well it's performing when it is up. Mean time to repair measures the average time it takes to repair a network device when it breaks. And then mean time between failures measures the average time between failures of a device. Redundant network with a single point of failure. I've never really heard of this. Redundant network with a single point of failure. Maybe it means like only having one point of failure, like one point in one area. It's, let's see, internal hardware redundancy, power supplies, and NICs. So that's like internal hardware. If it's talking about, I think it's talking about different areas, basically. Different areas in which, the computer is basically having errors. Which, like, what areas is it having failure? And it's saying redundant network with no single point of failure. So that's a redundant network with a single point of failure, meaning in one section in the computer or one component there is failure. And that can mean like power supply, that can mean hardware, that can mean NICs. Redundant network with no single points of failure sounds like meaning you don't have any hardware issues. You're basically good. Now, link redundancy, multiple connections between devices, which it's still talking about. Redundancy of components. Okay, so there's redundancy of hardware, right? Power supplies, NICs, graphics cards, motherboard, whatever. And then there's redundancy of components, switches, routers, servers. Well, I guess servers wouldn't count since it basically is a computer, but switches and routers, wireless access points, that would be components. Hardware would be the physical stuff in the computer itself, but components would be like routers and switches. Okay. So, hardware. The, keeping the hardware up and running. Obviously, hardware takes many forms. Um, Devices with two network interface cards, so like hard drives, it's just saying that, hardware is a bunch of different components. And my phone's going off for a second. Sorry about that. Um, Often found in strategic network devices. Okay, devices with two network interface cards, hardware It's basically just saying hardware redundancy, meaning, because let's not forget, we're talking about network availability, right? So when it comes to hardware, you need to keep the hardware up to date in those servers, in that network. This is what he's talking about here. So you want to make sure all your hardware is good. You want to make sure all your components are good. Switches. Your switches, your routers. And, let's see. And then we go down to a topic called active-active. I've never heard of this, but apparently active-active is something, and it means multiple NICs are active at the same time on a server. Let's say it's a server, for example, and it has multiple NICs, and it is active-active. And what that means is multiple NICs are active at the same time, and they have their own MAC address. And makes troubleshooting more complex because you have multiple NICs. Each NIC has their own MAC address. And that's why it makes troubleshooting a lot harder, because you have more things. And apparently, that's called active-active. I don't know where you'd be using active-active. I guess you would use it in a server. You would use it in a server, so to speak. So that's one thing. Then we have a topic called network interface card teaming. And those of you who are in here, what we're talking about is, we're talking about how to keep a network up and running right now. So it's called network availability, those of you who just now dropped in. And we're kind of talking about topics in which we need to understand in order to keep that network up and running. So now we're on a topic called active-passive. We were on a topic called active-active, which basically means you have multiple Ethernet interfaces. You're using multiple Ethernet interfaces, and it makes it harder to troubleshoot because you have more Ethernet interfaces. So now we're on active-passive. Sorry. Excuse me. Which means one NIC is active at a time. Clients appear to have a single MAC address. So apparently, I've never really heard of this before, but apparently in some networking situations, you can have one NIC active, and clients appear to have a single MAC address. So that would mean, to me, basically, multiple people use one computer, because if you only have a single NIC, then that means multiple people are going to be using one computer, which is fine, but, I mean, it just depends on how big your network is. But would mean active-passive. I don't really get the concept. I doubt it's something you would really need to know. You just need to know it for a Network Plus on the CompTIA, if you're going to be taking the Network Plus. But anyways, on to the next topic. We're going to talk about network interface card teaming. Network interface card teaming is using a group of network interface cards for load balancing and failover on a server or other device. Basically, it just means, if we're putting this in our own words, it's basically just meaning that we are using a bunch of network interface cards to make the performance better, rather than having it all on one and it failing for some reason. Okay, now we're going to talk about layer 3 redundancy. Those of you who do not know, there is something called an OSI model. And what the OSI model is kind of like the representation of all of the things you need in order for a packet to transfer from one area to the next. You can view it from top down or bottom to top, depending on the context of the situation in which you are sending a data packet through a network. And this right here is just talking about layer 3 redundancy. I cannot remember what's on layer 3, which I apologize for, because it's just been a while since I looked at the OSI model, and I'm just now getting back into studying for my Network Plus. But I promise we will come back and review that once we can. Anyways, layer 3 redundancy. So obviously, I think layer 3 is mostly like routers. It's more like routers, switches, and stuff like that. Wireless access points, stuff that gets the packet out on the internet, which obviously does involve wrapping the packet up and sending it out to the World Wide Web. And that's what I think that's what they're talking about here when they say layer 3 redundancy. They're talking about getting the packet, making sure that that packet gets to the internet, having the redundancy so that there is no failures. If the default goes dead, they cannot leave the subnet. Okay, so now we're going to talk about some routers here. There is a concept, and since we're talking about layer 3 redundancy, and it's talking about virtual gateways, I'm not too great on this. I still need to study it and review it, obviously, but we will learn as we go through it. So, hot standby protocol. So this is a router, or hot standby router protocol. So this is a protocol, some sort of rule. And I'm assuming it's in Cisco routers, because it is talking about Cisco a lot here. So hot standby router protocol. And don't forget, we're talking about the redundancy of layer 3, which is routers, modems, stuff like that. So this is a protocol, I guess, to keep it redundant. And it's called hot standby router protocol. So now I'm going to explain what that is. Proprietary first hop redundancy by Cisco allows for active router and standby router, creates virtual router as the default gateway. Also, those of you who are in here do note that I am not showing the notes due to me getting them from somewhere else, and I don't want to get copyrighted. So I'm just kind of putting them in my own words the best I can. Okay, now there's a protocol called Virtual Router Redundancy Protocol. It says IETP, Open Standard Variant of HSRP. Do not ask me what that means. I honestly have no clue what that means. I'd have to look that up. Allows for active router and standby router. Not 100% what that means. I'm sure active router and standby router. Standby obviously would stand by until something would occur. And then active router probably stays active. And I'm sure both of them have their benefits and downfalls, but creates virtual router as the default gateway. And then there is gateway load balancing protocol. Proprietary first hop redundancy by Cisco. So it is a proprietary protocol by Cisco, pretty much. Focuses on load balancing over redundancy. Allows for an active router and standby router. Creates virtual router as the default gateway. So it's probably somewhere active router and standby router was probably discussed somewhere in the hardware section. If they did talk about it, they probably did. I just haven't got there yet. link aggregation control protocol, aggregation protocol, and don't forget that this does this is for redundancy of routers and modems. So I just want to emphasize that because that's why we're talking about these protocols right now. These protocols help the redundancy of those routers and modems. So link aggregation control protocol achieves redundancy by having multiple links between devices. Load balancing occurs over multiple links. Multiple links appear as single logical. Okay, now we're talking about a concept called multipathing. It creates more than one physical path between a server and its storage devices for better fault tolerance and performance. So multipathing is a failsafe, it sounds like to me. Because it creates more than one physical path between a server and its storage. So let's say one path breaks, then the other one, it could use the other path, which is pretty good, because that's actually really smart. I'm assuming it's probably like a protocol or hardware implementation, but that's really cool. That is really cool. Between server and its storage. Yeah. Now we're talking about designing redundant networks. So how do you go about designing a redundant network? If you were a network engineer right now, how would you go about designing it? How would you go about designing something that was redundant so that it wouldn't fail? So here are some design considerations. So you would ask yourself, where would redundancy be used? Where are you going to use this redundancy? Where do you want it? Obviously, some of the areas, just off the top of my head, I'm not even looking at my notes right now. Just off the top of my head, so we can reflect here, I would think of, like, you want redundancy in your hardware. You want redundancy in your, your packets. You want to have good connection to the internet. So that's just some of the areas in which you want redundancy. They say chassis redundancy. That basically means hardware. The hardware in your chassis needs to be up and running all the time. You want to keep an eye on temperature. Temperature is very important. You want to keep an eye on your hardware. You want to make sure hardware isn't failing. That implies testing hardware. You want to probably do that at least every 2 weeks or every week, depending on your situation. Software is also an area you want to look. Make sure there's no viruses. Is your computer acting up? Is your computer being fidgety? And then it says protocol characteristics affect design requirement. I don't know where you would apply the protocols. Maybe, I guess you could apply protocols on Active Directories, which those technically aren't even protocols. They're more security measures for people who are on the network, but that's also an important thing to do, though. If you have an Active Directory, you have a network full of people, you want to make sure that they can only do certain things so they don't screw up the network. Like, you want to prevent them from being able to access BIOS. You want to prevent them from being able to set basic passwords, because passwords are so easy to hack nowadays. You want to make sure they have, complex passwords, because if not, obviously someone who does have computer skills and does want to do harm to a company could easily do that. So it's important to set those parameters to make sure that they're secured. So let's talk about some best practices when it comes to designing redundant networks. So you want to examine a first good practice is having goals. Examine your technical goals. What is your goal for your company? Like, if you're designing a network, because that's what being a network engineer, that's what getting this network plus is about. What is your goal whenever it comes to making a network. So you're making a gap network. You need to talk to your CEO. What's their goal? What do they want this network for? What are they going to use the network for? Another thing is identifying the budget. How much can you spend on this network? How much will your CEO be able to afford? You know, categorizing the business applications in a profile, which is kind of what we just now talked about. Basically, like making a network that applies to the business, making a network that's going to best benefit the business. Performance standards. What kind of performance are you going to need in order to basically what kind of performance do you need to get shit done? Basically, what kind of performance, because that's going to be determined by the budget as well if you're gonna be doing that. Okay, established performance standards. What about another very good topic about best practices is, are you going to be able to manage it? Are you going to be able to manage the network? And that's very, very... Do you need more people to help you manage a network? Is it a small network? Are you going to be able to manage it yourself? That's important. That's something important I didn't think of. But it's definitely important to remember. Let's go ahead and look at this again, and let's just think about it. Let's reflect. So we talked about examining the business goals, because depending on what the business goals are depends on what the network needs to have. The budget, how much money does the business have? Are they a small business? Are they a bigger business? Do they have more money? Even the fact that, does the business need better hardware? Because depending on what the business is, because if you're a business making 3D graphics, you're going to have some pretty good hardware. Are you a gaming business? Are you making games? You're going to have good hardware, because those graphics do not run on cheap hardware. Are you just a business that needs Word? Then you could have some pretty cheap computers. You could probably budget computers. Of course, the administrator probably needs a good computer, but other than that, I'd say you'd be good. Performance standards, which is kind of like, what kind of performance does a computer need in order to run this business? Define how to manage and measure high availability. Make sure you've got some information under your belt so you know how to keep the network up. And then it says, remember, existing networks can be retrofitted, but it reduces the cost by integrating high available practices and technologies. So basically what he's saying here is, if you're going into a business, you're a network engineer basically, and they already have hardware, you could use that. You can use that hardware rather than just buying all new hardware. You can definitely use that hardware. Recovery sites. Okay, so these are sites. So basically, if you're going into a business, this kind of implies anywhere, but probably mostly businesses, since businesses are the main place that uses networks. But it could be military as well. Oh, I was waiting. Sorry, I'm just moving this. So there's things called cold sites. Cold sites are basically buildings with no hardware or software whatsoever. So it's just a big, basically empty building, and you're going to have to connect that all up yourself. Then there's warm sites, a building that already has equipment. You don't have to set up the equipment. You already have the equipment. Then there's hot sites. Warm sites have a little bit of equipment. It contains a lot of equipment, but you still have to restore it. And then there's hot sites, an available building that already has the equipment and data in place and is already configured. Warm sites already has the equipment, but still needs to be configured. Hot sites, they are buildings that have the equipment and are already configured, and there is minimal downtime. Another one, cloud sites. Allows for the creation of a recovery version of the organization enterprise network. So basically, they made a backup in the cloud. Is what it sounds like to me. Recovery time objective is a topic here. Time and service level within a business process must be restored after a disaster. So RTO is basically how much time is it going to take to recover our information after a disaster. Like if there were to be an environmental issue, let's say you live in Florida or California, whatever, and there's a hurricane, literally blast your business, you had everything. This is RTO. That's why we like cloud. Cloud will save you. This is why cloud computing is getting very popular. You have another, let's say you took the precaution, paid your monthly fees, whatever, and you're like, bro, yeah, we're gonna back up all our data and we're gonna put it on a cloud somewhere else where there is no tornadoes, where there is no freaking hurricanes, whatever, somewhere, that's a good idea because there's hardware backups. You can back up on a hard disk drive, or you can back up on a cloud at a data center. Smart thing to do. And that's what they're saying recovery time objective here is basically how soon can you get your information back in if there were to be a disaster. And that is recovery time objective. What's your time objective? What is your objective when it comes to recovery? How fast can you get that data back? Because as we all know, when you lose data, that's money, baby. And now we have, let's see, that was RTO. Now there's a concept called RPO. Interval of time during a disruption before data loss. Basically what we just now talked about too. And now we're going to talk about backup and recovery. So there is full backups. Complete backup is which is the safest and most comprehensive. It's time consuming and it's costly though. Then there's incremental backups, which is a backup only data changed since the last backup. So it's a weird type of backup, which I'll recommend doing more research on. Differential backup is the only backups data since the last full backup. Backups data since the last full backup. Huh. Oh, okay, yeah. That makes sense. So incremental is basically backing up the data every day. Differential is, hey, I'm going to make this full backup. Okay, wait a month. Okay, I'm going to make another backup. And a snapshot is read-only copy of data frozen in time. See how much more we got. We have a good bit. I might have to try to speed this up a bit, because we are running out of time. That was network availability. Yeah, we did talk about that. We talked about that. Backup and recovery. So we're at facility support. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We have 6 more pages. Alright, so we're going to take a little break right here, because we're at the 30-minute mark. We got 6 more pages. And we are at facility support. Basically, how facilities support for the backups and stuff like that. So, let's take a little 5-10 minute break here, and we'll come back at the 40-minute mark. So you guys go ahead and go get you a snack, go get you a bathroom break, and we'll be back at the 40-minute mark. So let's say we'll be back at 9:15. I'll put that in the chat. And I will go ahead and turn the music on as well. That way you guys can hear it. Alright, I'll be back. Sorry about that. One of my friends called me. Sorry I'm 2 minutes late. But anyways, let me go ahead and get my timer started. I like to record how long I study. That way I know statistically and realistically how long I actually do study rather than just saying, oh yeah, I studied for an hour. It's called Forest. I highly recommend getting it if you guys are gonna study sometime. Yeah, just look it up if you have Google Play. I'm not sure if it's on iPhone. I figure it is, because it looks like a pretty good app. And you know how iPhone, how strict they are about letting apps in their app store. But it does seem like a really good app. I figure iOS has it too, but I don't know for sure. But it's called Forest. It's really good for just recording how long you study, and in a realistic way, because it helps you realize, like, holy crap, I've only been studying for 20 minutes and I'm already ready for break. Because that's what I do all the time. But anyways, let's get back into studying. We are studying, just a sort of review, we are studying basically network redundancy, what we can do to keep the network up and running while we're working at a business or in the military, whatever. But yeah, and we are on the topic. We just now got off a few of the important topics, such as, if I can think of it, my brain wants to just give out this morning, because don't know why. You know, I didn't realize it, but this stuff does wear you out, like reading it and just discussing it with people. But it definitely does wear you out. But we were just now talking about, essentially, how we have goals, how we should plan goals, and plan out how we're going to make the network redundant, and how much money are you going to have based on the company you're working for, and all that stuff. But we stopped on... Let me go ahead and start this. And I'm going to go ahead and pause this, because I don't want to blast you guys out. I forgot to. Sorry. Sorry if you guys didn't hear me just now. But now we're going to talk about facility support. Make sure that's off. And we're going to try to stick another hour in there, because I figure in another hour we should be done with this section. But yeah, it's really cool. I'm enjoying the notes that I got. I don't want to say what kind of notes I have, because I'm afraid it's going to be copyrighted or something. But we're just rewording it. We're just going to reword the notes that we have and put them in our own words. And that way we can all learn something today. And just as a little reminder, we are talking about network redundancy, how to keep a network up as network engineers. So now we're on the topic called facility support. Facilities support. And we're going to talk about UPSs. So what are UPSs? UPSs can be used in... we can use UPSs in our computers, just regular end-user computer. We can use UPSs on any computer out there, any system. A UPS stands for uninterruptible power supply. It provides emergency power to a load when the input power source or main power fails. So basically, it's a failsafe. Why do we use UPSs? We use UPSs because it's dangerous to let your computer shut down very quickly, because that can cause data to be lost. That can cause issue. It can cause your hardware to get harmed. That's why it's good to have a UPS. Power distribution unit. What is a PDU? Power distribution unit, PDU. It distributes electrical power, especially to racks of computers and network. So PDUs are going to be mostly on server racks. It basically distributes power during a blackout, apparently, which I didn't realize. I thought that a PDU was mostly just something that I don't know why I just now blanked. But PDU basically distributes power among server racks. That's the most thing to be aware of. Or a generator can provide power during a Blackout. Yeah, so I didn't think that's what it was. He's just saying that a generator can provide power during a blackout. But a PDU, they do make PDUs combined with UPSs. But the main thing to note is that a PDU distributes electrical power, especially to rack of computers, and networking a computer located within a data. So it distributes power, okay? It does not, it's not like a UPS. It doesn't create backup power. Now, if you have a generator combined with a PDU, that's great. Or a UPS combined with a PDU, that's great. But you still have to have that backup power. It's just used to distribute power on a rack. It's basically like a, if I'm not mistaken, in the pictures that I watched, it's basically like a surge suppressor, but mounted onto a rack, essentially. Okay, now we have generators. I think everyone knows what a generator is. I've always heard of generators. It's basically just a thing that provides power if you have a blackout. And that's where UPSs are good, too. If you have a UPS plus a generator, I don't know why you would need a generator, unless, I guess if you needed more power. But the thing is, if you are going to use a generator, then I would recommend a one that kicks on automatically, I guess. Which I don't even know if that would help, because you definitely want a UPS, because it keeps the computer on so you can shut it down properly. Generators are good if you need to have it up, I guess, for a certain period of time. Depending on how long. I know they're expensive, though, so... And then there's wet pipe system. I don't know what that has to do with anything. I guess if there's a fire, using a sprinkler system that contains water. So a wet pipe system, since we're talking about facility support, then a wet pipe system would be good so that it could contain fires. And then there's pre-action system. A detector actuation, like a smoke detector. Oh, okay. Yeah, because we're talking about facility support. We're talking about what kind of support is there in facilities so we can prevent anything catastrophic to losing our data. Okay, now we're going to talk about quality of service. What is quality of service? Quality of service, to put it very, very simply, allows you to distribute data among computers. Okay. Of course, there's different ways of using quality of service, but when you hear quality of service, it's probably going to be, you know, restricting one computer from another computer. So let's say there's a computer that uses a lot of data, and you don't like how it's using all that data because it's making the other computers slow. That's when quality of service comes in. Because with quality of service, you can basically make it to where that computer that's using up all that data can be slower. You can put a data cap on that computer, essentially. There is different categories of quality of service, apparently, which I didn't know. There's delay. Time a packet travels from source to destination. So that basically means you can delay a packet if you want. Jitter, uneven arrival of backups, I don't know. And drops. I don't know how that's under quality of service, but... Effective bandwidth. Alright, we're gonna skip that. Quality of service categorization. What is the purpose of QoS, which is quality of service? So to categorize traffic. So quality of service is to categorize traffic. So the purpose of QoS is to categorize traffic, apply a policy to those traffic categories, and prioritize them in accordance to the quality of service policy. So basically, you're categorizing the traffic, you're setting parameters for the traffic, and it is accordance to the QoS policy. So categorization of traffic determines network performance. Categorize traffic into specific categories. Low delay traffic, low priority traffic. So you could categorize voice and streaming. You know that voice and streaming, you want to have high speed. So you could categorize it as low delay, meaning you want it to not have any delay. You need the fast internet for that. Low priority traffic, web browsing. There's no use to make something high priority, since if it doesn't require a lot of internet speed, like web browsing. I don't know what non-mission critical data means. I don't know what that means. But web browsing, for example, doesn't really require. Email doesn't really require a whole lot of data. So you could put it in a QoS saying, hey, I don't really need a whole lot of data being sent to this because it doesn't require that much. Apparently there's methods of categorizing traffic. It talks about classification, marking, congestion management. So congestion management, I can talk about that. I don't know, I guess classification would be like, depending on if it's a higher classification or lower classification. Marking, not sure. Congestion management, is there an area where a lot of data is getting congested? You can turn that down. You can put that in a category to turn that data, to put a policy in there to make it to where that data isn't getting congested right there. You can put a restriction there. There is classification of traffic, which is important to know. Traffic is placed in different categories. If you have Wireshark, you could probably identify the traffic. What are some examples of classification of traffic? And when he says traffic, he means data moving across Ethernet or wireless. We're talking about the data that's traveling on the network. Some examples of types of traffic, which is really interesting. POP3, IMAP. POP3 is email, receiving emails. IMAP is also receiving emails. SMTP, sending out emails. So when you see SMTP, you know someone's sending an email. Or POP3, you know someone's receiving an email. And of course there's more depending on the port numbers, because that's kind of how you tell what type of traffic it is. Congestion. Close to the cutting edge. The edge of the blade to the sun. Typically discards packets and extends. Shaping, link. Okay. Alright, now to basically, we're going to go ahead and talk about marking of traffic, and then we're going to talk about congestion management, congestion avoidance, and policy and shaping. And then after that, we're going to end it. So let's go ahead and talk about marking of traffic. It says that it altered bits within a frame or packet indicates handling of traffic. Network tools make decisions based on markings. So markings is network tools making decisions. Congestion management. When a device receives traffic faster than it can be transmitted, it buffers the extra traffic until bandwidth becomes available. So congestion can be buffering, basically. Queuing algorithm empties the packets in specific sequences. Queuing algorithm types. Wait fair queuing, low latency queuing, weighted round robin. Congestion avoidance. What can we do to essentially avoid the congestion? Congestion avoidance. Newly arrived packets would be discarded if the device's output queue filled the capacity. Random early detection. Red. Used to prevent this from occurring. As queue fills, the possibility of a discard increases until it reaches 100. If a 100%, all traffic of that type is dropped. Red, instead, drops packets from selected queues based on defined limits. If TCP traffic, it will be retransmitted. If UDP, it will simply be dropped, because remember, TCP is connection oriented, and UDP is the fire and forget missile. Okay, I lied. We're going to be covering a little bit more, because we're going to do policying and shaping, link efficiency, and then do link efficiency. And then it talks about compression and LFI, and I don't know what those are. So policy and shaping, we're going to talk about policy. Typically discards packets that exceed a configured rate limit, speed limit. Dropped packets result in retransmissions. Recommended for high-speed interfaces. Shaping, buffers, delays, traffics exceeding configured rate. Recommended for slower speed interfaces. Link efficiency, compression. Packet payload is compressed to conserve bandwidth. That's what link efficiency is, or one type of link efficiency. So it compresses it. VoIP, which is talking over the internet basically. Payload can be reduced by 50%, and I'm sure they use that because payload size 40 bytes to 20 bytes. VoIP header can be reduced by 90 to 95, which is actually really impressive. Link efficiency, LFI, link fragmentation and interleaving. That's what LFI stands for. So link fragmentation and interleaving. Fragments large data packets and interleaves the smaller data packets between the fragments. Utilized on slower speed links to make the most of limited bandwidth. And that will be it for network redundancy. Thank you guys for watching. We are going to be doing another topic soon. That was just the first topic we wanted to talk about, is network redundancy. Of course, we had a lot of jargon in there, but I think the main idea of this part was definitely just the redundancy of keeping a network up. And that's why we talked about doing updates, making sure your hardware is good, and making sure and keeping an eye on the QoS, because which is where the hard part comes in, I feel like, is the QoS part, because you're keeping an eye on the traffic, you're keeping an eye on the congestion, you're keeping an eye, and I feel like that's a little bit harder to keep an eye on than your hardware and your software side of things in terms of updating and making sure there's no viruses. But it is important to keep an eye on the congestion and stuff like that. It's probably the most important part. But yeah, I feel like it was a good chapter. I feel like we all learned something from it. So I will be coming back. Let me see what's next. Because I'm excited to do the network attacks one, because we're going to be talking about a lot of security stuff. Okay, so we just now did network availability. So when we come back, we're going to be doing network management. And that'll be more of how to manage our network. We kind of just talked about how to keep our network redundant in this section. So the next session is keeping the network, managing the network. What kind of documents we need to manage the network, stuff like that. But anyways, I'm going to end it right here, but stay tuned because I will be back on at, let me see what time it is. Let's shoot for 10 o'clock, and that'll be the network management section. So be back at 10 o'clock, and